You probably know someone who has been touched by cancer, a parent, a friend, a colleague, maybe it's even you. And for most of us, the story we've inherited about cancer is this. It's an older person's disease. It's something that happens to people who didn't take care of themselves. It's something that if you do the right things, you can largely avoid. But that story is fracturing. In November 2024, James Van Der Beek announced to the world that he'd been privately battling stage 3 colorectal cancer. He was 46 when he was diagnosed. He'd been eating organic, doing cold plunges, exercising. He had no idea anything was wrong until a change in his bowel habits made him finally ask for a colonoscopy. He fought for over 2 years, and in December 2025, he appeared on the Today Show. He said he felt good. 6 weeks later, he was gone. And his story is not the exception. Chadwick Boseman passed away at 43. Kate Middleton was diagnosed at 42. Just a couple months ago, Tatiana Salzberg, JFK's granddaughter, died at 35. The numbers behind these stories are staggering. From 1990 to 2019, early onset cancer rates rose nearly 80% globally. 1 in 2 people receive a cancer diagnosis in their lifetime, which means this isn't a distant threat. This is the most personal health reality of our time. So what is actually happening? How much of this is lifestyle and how much is just bad luck? Today, we're going to go all the way into it with 2 of the most respected doctors you'll find anywhere on this topic. Dr. William Li is one of the world's leading cancer researchers. He didn't just study cancer from a distance, he helped develop over 40 treatments that are actively changing outcomes for patients right now. He's also watched someone he loves face a stage 4 diagnosis and be told by her doctor there was nothing left to do. He didn't accept that, and she's alive today because of it. Dr. Dawn Musalem spent over 2 decades as an integrative oncologist at Mayo Clinic, one of the most respected medical institutions in the world. She has sat with hundreds of people at every stage of this disease. She has also been one of them. In her mid-20s, 3 months into medical school, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given months to live. That was 25 years ago. She is still here. There are 2 people on Earth who can actually tell you what you need to know about cancer. It's the 2 people in this room. All right, before we jump into today's episode, we wanted to share an important update. For the past year, behind the scenes, we've been building something that we believe is foundational to everything we talk about here. It's called The 9. The podcast is powerful, but it's episodic. It's one big idea at a time. Mental health, dating, sex, spirituality, whatever it might be. Each episode stays with a single theme long enough to actually understand it. But the 9 brings everything together. It keeps the 9 core areas of life across mind, body, and spirit in view at the same time. You've probably heard us allude to them each week. Now we're putting them into a rhythm you can actually live with. Every week, the 9 does 3 specific things for you. 1, it directs your attention to the parts of life that need care right now. 2, it offers 1 clear evidence-based insight drawn from science, history, spiritual wisdom, and real human experience. And 3, it suggests 1 grounded action you could take in each area to respond. In a world engineered to hijack your attention, the 9 becomes a line of defense, a way to pause, recenter, and keep what matters front and center. If you do that imperfectly but consistently, you begin to thrive. That's what the 9 is for. So you could sign up through the link in the description below or head to mightypursuit.com/the9. All right, now let's get back to today's episode. A few months back, December 2025, James Van Der Beek appeared on the Today Show, and he said that he felt good. He was feeling fortunate in the wake of a very unfortunate diagnosis, and he was still trying a bunch of stuff. And then, 6 weeks later, he was gone. 48, 6 kids. And this was a couple years after diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer. So given both of what you guys do, what did you feel when you first saw that case or cases like that of someone that is so young that all of a sudden is seemingly healthy and then this manifests?
I mean, I can start, when I heard the story and when I heard what happened, and it was actually his daughter she had did a little bit of an interview, and it was extremely touching, and I know his wife as well. And what happened for me is the faces of all the patients that I lost, which isn't a large number, but some of the young women, same thing. Young people aren't the ones being screened. And when we find cancer at the later stages, it's very hard to treat it. Mm-hmm. And this is just a big shout out to Discovery, like we were talking about before we got started in recording here, is what can we do better to, number one, prevent, to understand the whole pathogenesis of the cancer. Why do we have this rapid uptick in cancers in young people? My youngest patient, I have chills right now saying this, who had breast cancer, was 20 years old. It shouldn't happen. You're not on earth long enough. When I started in medical school, we never saw this. But we know that it's the young people that have this rise in almost 80% of cancers among young people. So it was just really hard. And of course, I took it personal, reflected back to my own personal journey with the history of stage 4 cancer, where I'm, do you say lucky ones? But I was able to be cured, and I was told I wouldn't be able to be cured. So you just deeply reflect. And I think for me, it is really just trusting that there's a reason and purpose for our existence. And I have a deep connection with God or the divine, and just knowing that there is a reason or a lesson in this that we may not just yet understand.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're always shocked when the cancer diagnosis is given, but I have a biological framework, a lens to look at things. And a lot of people don't realize this, but, cancer is just normal cells that have kind of gone wild. And so we're actually forming cancers in our body all the time. And when somebody asks me why did they get cancer at whatever age they're at, I try to have a compassionate response to them. And you certainly don't want to make people feel like they're to blame. But as a researcher, when I'm done with that individual patient, I'm walking by myself, I started to ask the question, why don't we get cancer more often? And in fact, we actually do get cancer all the time. And getting cancer means normal cells that are dividing, copying, pasting, which is why we're still around today from yesterday and we'll still be around tomorrow, makes mistakes. And when you have those mistakes, you have mutations, and mutations really are the kind of the bud, the foundational bud of developing a cancer in the future. So an interesting thing that has been worked on is how many DNA mistakes does a typical adult make? Or somebody who's, like an adult age, make. Do you have any idea? We got 40 trillion cells in the body, and how many mistakes are made in DNA every day, 24 hours, Because each of those mistakes is a microscopic cancer. The answer is 10,000 mistakes are made every 24 hours. So in theory, we're actually, we actually are laying track for these little microscopic abnormalities that can turn into cancers, but they don't turn into cancers, most of them, because we actually have defenses in the body, like our immune system, like our ability to prevent blood vessels from growing into them. We've got lots of hardwired mechanisms that prevent cancer. And so this idea of screening is not prevention. Screening is early detection. And when people say, well, you should get a mammogram to prevent breast cancer, that doesn't prevent breast cancer. It catches it early, which is really, really important. But I think that, the idea of somebody younger and the trend towards people being diagnosed with cancer younger begs the question, what's going on? It's not that we're missing it, but we're missing something. And the question is, what is it that we need to figure out? Is it our environment? Is it lifestyle? There's so many moving parts to what could be going on. It's really worthwhile thinking about it, because we cannot afford, as it is, we can't afford to treat all the people who get sick today. So as a society, what do we need to do, both from quality of life and preservation of ability to contribute meaningfully to the community and the workforce, but also just like pure economics. Like, we can't just let things happen and then get out of control and then just throw the kitchen sink without any thought of what it's going to cost us as a society.
So in light of what you're saying, most people are familiar with the statistic that like 1 in 2 people will get cancer at some point in their life, whether, and then that's not even including the people that you love, right, around you. And so in light of what you just said, what does that actually mean? When someone's saying you're going to get cancer, in light of what you're saying, that this is kind of always manifesting in your body, what are we really talking about?
Listen, I think that there is starting to be, and ultimately there's going to be a shift of cancer being thought of as a lethal diagnosis to cancer being like other diseases, other chronic diseases, other diseases that just develop over time, and where we don't have that kind of horror movie fear factor response when you hear about the cancer diagnosis. And I can tell you, in my career as a physician, I've already started to see more and more end-stage cancer cases being able to be rescued and reversed that I didn't think was possible. And it comes from immunotherapy and more targeted therapies. There's some really advanced things that are going on that are rescuing people and bringing people into a curative state. And so I think in the future, what we're looking to is a better understanding of how cancer develops. How do we support the body's health defenses? What kind of treatments that are available to get us into a better position so that cancer like arthritis or like diabetes or like hypertension winds up being something we got to deal with, but that isn't really kind of a terminal diagnosis. It's not a death sentence. And that's really, I think, so I'm just saying that in addition to the biology, there's also exactly what you brought up. When you hear about something in the news and it's shocking, it actually brings us right back to that fear factor response to it. And I do think that as a researcher and being plugged into what's going on, this response, this reaction is eventually going to change because of what's going on.
Yeah. And, cancer, when it happens, it doesn't just all of a sudden happen and it's there. It takes years to progress. It's that initiation.
Not a car accident.
Right. Exactly. Not like the one that made me late getting here today. It's that initiation, promotion, and progression. But what I think a lot of people actually don't realize is they think it's your genes that are causing this. And it's actually a very small percentage of the cancers occurring that are a result of our genetics, about 10%, maybe up to 15%. Then there's this other little component that's family history. And I've had people say before, well, that's really confusing. But it's family histories, these clusters, could that just be how they were raised and they had an exposure? Or is there maybe just a gene we don't know about yet? So maybe about 25% are this genetic and this family history. So about 75%, give or take, are from other things, whether it's our environment, lifestyle, exposures that we are learning about.
And they're cumulative things that happen. So it's not like you went out one night and, drank a glass of wine or, inhaled secondhand smoke at a club that actually does it for you. It's the fact that there's patterns that repeat over time. So it's, week after week, month after month, those are the compounding interest of lifestyle deficits or insults that actually can contribute to those lifestyle cancers.
That I believe, happen in utero. We need to really think about the whole life cycle of a human. And so often, people are 50 years old, like, I need to do this so I reduce the risk of cancer. And it starts early on. And so I always like this when I work with women. And a lot of times they would say, well, I want to live healthier, but what about my kids, my husband? They're not going to want to do it. It's the whole family. We all need to just step up and we have a choice to be healthier, not perfect, but a little tilt towards healthier.
And, and to speak to this whole idea about getting cancer, you don't get it like you get a cold, right? I mean, it's, again, this sort of thing that develops quietly, and it might not turn into a cancer. It might actually regress and go back to being harmless for you. But there's some interesting compiled statistics that have been emerged from autopsy studies of people. So people who wind up dying from non-cancer causes get an autopsy to figure out what actually happened. And they're, in an autopsy, you look at every tissue. Pathologist, a specialist in looking at tissues, either in life or death. And it's some startling statistics appear. So it turns out that between the ages of 40 and 50, autopsy studies of women show that about 40% of women actually already have breast cancer, microscopic breast cancers that are far lower than what you would be diagnosed with. And most of those women are not going to go on to develop breast cancer. It's just that if you look for them, you might find them. So something about the environment of the breast, the microenvironment, and then lifestyle can actually take something that could be harmful that actually doesn't wind up being harmful. For men, between the ages of 50 and 60, 50% of men have prostate cancers. All right. Silent cancers in the prostate most likely won't ever become a prostate cancer that's going to kill you or be dangerous, but they're there. And then, in people who are 70 and older, almost 100% of people will have thyroid cancers, microscopic thyroid cancer. So what I'm trying to communicate is that cancer is not the disease we always thought it was. Like, it's like being jumped in an alleyway, like where all of a sudden you were just by yourself and all of a sudden, somebody springs out and grabs you. Not like that.
Yeah.
It's this long development with a lot of complicated things going on in your body, genetics playing only part of the role that we used to think about. And now we're beginning to really explore lifestyle choices, cumulative exposures. And, that's probably in that bag, that black box is where we're going to find some of the answers to the trend of having cancers being diagnosed at a younger age.
The thing I want to push on, I mean, you brought this up, the statistics, like the 75% lifestyle. And I think a lot of people have heard that. But then when you look at some of these cases, like James Beek, right? He went talking about his case. He was like, "Oh, I was eating organic. I was doing cold plunges. I was exercising, And then you have other people like Tatiana Schlossberg, granddaughter of JFK, died 35 years old a few months ago as well. And she wrote when she revealed this, she said, "I wasn't sick. I didn't feel sick. I was actually one of the healthiest people I know." And then when it comes to wealth too, right? So like we associate wealth with this means of being able to have greater access to resources and also treatments and stuff like that. You have someone like Chadwick Boseman 6 years ago, died at 43. And even Kate Middleton got diagnosed, I think it was breast cancer. Yeah, 42. And so Is that just the 25% they're talking about? Or like it's really impossible to answer this question unless you like look at their specific life, their specific what they were doing?
Listen, I mean, I think our bodies are hardwired. I know our bodies are hardwired with defenses that can protect us from developing clinical cancers. All right. So a simple way to think about this is we have shields in our body that defend us against all kinds of diseases, including cancer. When our shields are down, we're more vulnerable to actually get let the disease progress. And if you think about it that way, I mean, look, we all could develop diabetes, but we actually have really good metabolic systems in our body to help us prevent getting there. But if you wind up having some defects in your metabolism and you keep on hammering on those defects, over time, you'll eventually be your shields are down, so you're more likely to actually develop the disease. And I think if you sort of, rather than think about cancer as that sniper bullet that took you out, but to recognize that it's something that our body is actively working to counter every single day, I think it puts us in a different frame of life. So all those examples you just gave, it makes me think about, I wonder what shields went down that could have been shored up. And for the next person, what can we do to advise them? And it might be stress, it might be living a stressful life. It might be inactivity. They're not exercising enough. It could be bad dietary choices repeated over time. Those are all things that I think, those of us who are working more on that functional integrative medicine, that's where we're going. We're not trying to find magic bullets or bad actors, bad moves that you're making. It's much more complex than that.
And it could be exposures. There's a lot of triggers for inflammation. Yep. There's a lot of reasons why the immune system isn't regulating and isn't doing the job the way it should. Simple things like sleep and, like you said, stress, things we just don't think about that are hard to perfect, especially in these very type A individuals, including us, right? And so I think we owe it to our body, knowing the science, to show up for ourselves, take good care of ourselves. But that's not a 100% you're never going to have a disease. It's just doing your best, because we know that's the most powerful thing that you have the autonomy over to control. But beyond that, you just have to trust. And that's where, I would describe myself as a spiritual person. And I believe in the fact that there is a lesson in life that we have to look toward. In 2016, I actually had a near-death experience, and it was remarkable. And so I certainly don't want to die, but I think that we really tether ourselves to this physical world. And beyond this physical world is something, and it gives me chills again, something so grand, so glorious, a world where there's total acceptance, the complete unknowing, and embodied love. And so, maybe we work so hard to be alive, and we probably need to work better at dying better, because beyond this world, at least what I experienced, is glorious. And so, obviously I take really good care of myself, and I'm not trying to fast forward to that day, but I feel very comfortable with that day. I'm very comfortable with my mortality. The Himalayan Providence of Bhutan, they meditate on the concept of death 5 times a day, and they're the happiest place on earth.
Wow.
Because they're paying attention to their impermanence.
Yeah.
We just don't know. So this message is very interesting, though. People need to take good care of themselves. And in doing that, it's not a 100% nothing is going to ever happen. And just because something happens to someone that is a public figure shouldn't be a reason why you all of a sudden don't show up for yourself. So there's 2 important messages that I think people can gain from that.
Yeah. Well, our audience is very familiar with your experiences because we've talked about it on like 3 or 4 different episodes. I didn't even know that happened to you, but I think that's a really extremely valuable thing. I mean, it connects back to some of what you were saying, because you have these headlines, and then it's like there's so much fear that is generated from these headlines, and like how do we not just treat this problem that we're seeing with the progression of cancer, but then how do we actually handle people's mindsets around it? When you see these headlines in the news, based on what you both have seen, are those things like actually representative of like the larger culture, or are those just like a few plucked out cases that are very public, very famous, and very tragic, but like isn't necessarily what might be happening in the average population?
I mean, we know that among young people, that is where we see the increase in cancer incidence. It's the only area we see the increase in cancer incidence. But in our clinics, I'm not ordinarily seeing very young people. So we remember these stories, and that's why they are shared. But the majority of individuals still coming in and getting cancer are in that 5th, 6th, 7th decade of life, because they have had more opportunity for the DNA and for the body to have those little hits and mishaps within the DNA where the tumor can progress.
And I think it's really important for us, we're physicians who are responsible in terms of how we message and can reflect the reality of patients. I think that people who are not in medicine, they hear about a few young people who get cancer. It tends to imprint on people like this is actually what's going on everywhere. But we're not actually seeing that as a major driver. It's kind of like, you hear about a school shooting. It doesn't mean that everyone needs to lock down their grade school. It doesn't really happen that way, but it does raise awareness, and it makes us all be a little bit more vigilant, I guess, to think about it. And so there's benefit in that, but I'm one of the people who likes to focus from these lessons on how do we actually do prevention, how do we embrace life better or embrace our health. That's a reason to actually think about, well, how do I get healthier rather than how do I avoid cancer? How do I lean into the healthy part of my life?
And to do that not rooted in fear, but to do it because you want to step into your aliveness and you want to have vigor and vitality and feel good. Because I don't think anything good is accomplished when you're doing it out of fear.
Yeah. Showing up for yourself. That's a great way of saying it.
I love that.
That's really fascinating, a lot of things you just said there, because, I mean, a lot of people, there's this sort of illusion of understanding of, I guess, what's going on. And so if you look at 1990 to 2019 and you say there's an 80% increase, well, if the baseline, I guess, was like extremely rare, then maybe it's like a little less rare. But like, what is, you think, 80% increase. And you think that means like...
Well, that number is not across the board.
Yes.
Number one. But again, this is why, like, look, we're doing a podcast here. Taking a soundbite out of that and then amplifying it through an algorithm is actually misinformation. So I want to clarify that. There are certain cancers in certain communities and certain populations where we have seen that type of increase, but those numbers change over time, and it's sort of like they look at certain data sets. I don't know what the latest data set you're looking at, but I would say it's not correct to say cancer has increased in young people by 80% over a couple of decades.
Well, yeah. Well, what I'm saying is like, so if let's just say you take 100 people from the population, and then the rate before was like maybe 2 people under 40 out
Yeah,
of
it's the
those 100
relative
people.
risk.
Relative.
Well,
The relative
2 out
risk.
of 100, and then you say 80% increase. So then basically, what are you adding? Like 1.6 person to that. So then the risk actually went from 2 out of 100 to 3.6 out of 100, which I'm saying
It's
that
still
the
a very
public,
small number.
yes,
It's just
the public
Right.
number sounds so drastic because you say 80%, but that you're only like increasing like a couple people per maybe like 100. Is that
that's
correct?
an important point because,
Yeah.
and I love that you brought this up because that clickbait, because, you know, we will often, when we're talking about risk reduction, we're referring to the relative risk.
Yeah.
And so these numbers sound really exciting that, oh, you know, blueberries reduce the risk of breast cancer by 25. That sounds like huge. And it's actually great to hear that, but it's a relative risk. It's not an absolute risk. So
Right.
it's a reduction of whatever that total risk is. So I like what you just mentioned. And it's something that we have to certainly pay attention to.
It's framing the context and thinking about how these numbers are developed. And I think that's one of the big challenges of, you know, health and wellness and influencers today is that it's easy to jump on numbers and then quickly throw them out into the, you know, into the platforms, and then the algorithm picks them up and then feeds them to you, and then they get clipped. And so then you have to have the thumbnail that actually has the juicy bit to it. So I'm glad, you know, you're framing it that way. That's actually a really responsible way to actually think about it.
Yeah. What are, you know, you guys, you know, have very impressive resumes. I mean, what are the things that frustrate you most about the online discourse on these subjects, or myths and things that just keep getting perpetuated, where you're like, maybe even on Instagram, you're like, oh God, I'm seeing that again, and it's just completely not accurate?
Well, for me, you know, the best we have with lifestyle is population data, and the majority of that is observational, because it's really hard to fund lifestyle research because no one is going to make money on it, right? You make money on drug discovery studies. You're not going to make money on lifestyle. We already know the truth. It's actually not difficult. I mean, we know what it takes to be healthy. And so it is always interesting that people are really excited to hear, how can I eat better? How can I move better? How do I sleep better? Because it's really going back to the basics, kind of what your great-grandmother did, really. It's all you need to do. It really doesn't get much fancier beyond that. And there's no perfect anything, you know? So I just like to keep the message very simple. However, it is exciting to talk about how powerful that lifestyle medicine really is when it comes to disease reduction for everything, you know. And there's a crazy statistics that among 65-year-olds, 95% of them have one chronic disease. So pretty much everyone in this country, you know. 93% of Americans aren't metabolically healthy. You know, it's just
The same numbers.
Yeah, 97% of what we spend in healthcare is just all reactive. So we just have to really help to message what it looks like to lead a healthy lifestyle, one that not only helps to mitigate those diseases, but again, helps you feel better.
I mean, I think the overall message of paying attention to our diet and lifestyle is a great opportunity to, you know, raise the bar for everyone to have that conversation. But you really need to personalize things to yourself, because everyone's going to be a little bit different. That's the whole other dimension. And I think that what Don just mentioned about this idea that a lot of our lifestyle recommendations come from population studies. You know, most people who are out there are not statisticians, they're not epidemiologists, they're not public health specialists. It's very difficult to figure out how to interpret all that. But, you know, I remember when I was in medical school, we always were taught to disparage nutrition and lifestyle data or recommendations, because they're like, there's not enough evidence. It's not a randomized controlled trial like a pharmaceutical company. There's no p-value to it. And again, for people who are listening to this, these are all the kind of back of the shop arguments that medical doctors have about data and about evidence. And I think what's happening now is that what used to be back of the shop discussions in medicine have now become public conversations. And not everyone is trained to, even in medicine, not really fluent in how to understand the nuances. And, you know, I think that, so what frustrates me is also what I think is a good thing, which is let's elevate the bar of conversation for everyone. But because the information is so accessible to everyone to have a conversation about, if you aren't trained to really understand how to interpret it, it's very easy to have misinformation is also sometimes misinterpretation.
Yeah.
And so for anybody listening to this conversation, what I would say the simplest thing you can do if you're hearing health information and you have a question about it is to ask the question, where is it coming from? And is the voice that is saying it qualified to deliver that kind of information?
I think that's so important. And, on social media, it's always the extremes that grab everyone's attention. And many of these studies are preclinical studies, these claims. So people always need to ask the question if something doesn't quite make sense, or if it's going against what Dr. Lee typically says, was that study or that claim even done in humans? Was it a human study? Because preclinical data just doesn't apply to the human. We need more evidence. And then how many people were in that study? You see some supplement studies, et cetera. And it's like 3 people, or it's 1 person. It's
and I'll tell you, not only in supplements, but now we're going into pharmaceutical clinical trials and realizing, even for cancer therapeutics, that we have to personalize trials to be able to identify responders and non-responders. So a cancer drug that's being developed to tackle breast cancer, lung cancer, brain cancer, what have you, we know, actually we've known this for decades, not everybody's going to respond the same way. And what happens is when you take a reductionist view, look for the average, throw out all the super responders and non-responders, and call it an average to get an FDA approval, and I'm simplifying something really complicated, even though that's led to modern cancer treatment and led to the development of evidence, that is oversimplified. And so what's happening now, because I'm involved with this, is how do we do personalized oncology for clinical trials? How do we personalize it for the patient? How do we get away from the cookbook, the recipe book? This is how you make spaghetti carbonara every single time if you want to be traditional. That doesn't work for every patient. So we're getting better because we're starting to figure out how do we tailor treatments for the individual. And this is actually a sea change within medicine itself.
Yeah, it really convicts me. I mean, I think there's this responsibility for media companies and podcasts of when you bring somebody on and like the fact checking of information and things that are being presented and ideas that are being presented. I think it's not just the medical establishment. I think that, we've always tried to make an effort. I mean, it's not perfect, but like, who are you having on your podcast? Like, what are their credentials and what are they talking about? Because I think the rise of charisma and charismatic personalities in like the online discourse can be dangerous. If someone's talking about something, they're not a physician, but maybe they deeply understand it. Maybe that's not necessarily a problem. But if someone is very charismatic talking about an issue and all of a sudden is a cancer expert, but they have no medical training, no background in this,
it's a concern. Right there. You can't be a cancer expert if you have no medical training or background in that. So let's put it right out there. But honestly, that's actually where we need to toe the line. And I think you have two physicians who are actually, expert in what we're doing. So we're happy to have this conversation with you because we're able to actually help to toe the line, or hold the line. But I think that, it's difficult because we live in a clickbait environment for the media and anybody can have a voice and actually people's attention, myself included. If you hear something juicy, you listen to it, even to think about if it's true or not, and then the algorithm picks that up and serves you up more of that information, and then you don't know. Listen, I mean, I have found it recently so difficult to know where to get even good news about geopolitics because half the things that my feed, the algorithm feeds me, because I looked at something that wasn't true, is more untruth. And so that I do think that, I wouldn't call it a gale force wind that we're actually trying to push back against, but we are pushing against digital forces and marketing forces that are quite difficult to control. And that's at the end of the day why if you're following an individual because they are qualified and they're giving you good information that can be beneficial to you, that's why it's useful to spread information, spread the links and spread the connections to other people with qualified people. That's what I try to do. And if I find somebody who I think has got something really important to say, I do try to amplify that individual's impact by spreading it to people I know.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so many different incentive systems that are going. It's almost like this like reinforcing cycle of things that like are going around because like yeah, you could present truth-real information. Is that exciting to people? Like, does that retain attention, right? And then does it, if you're trying to like build a business, right? Like these are probably all the things that are in the mind of media companies and people are building things.
I think responsible physicians can't give in on a race to the bottom in terms of credibility.
Yeah.
No matter who you are. Like that's not how we're trained. It's not, we would never practice that. We would never do that in our own practices. And so I do also think that there's an opportunity for people going to medical school now or going through training who are already fluent in social media. It'll be interesting to see for that generation how they're combining their formal education, their own experiences, and also their fluency in social media, how that's going to actually come out.
I agree.
So in terms of the manifestation of this whole thing, there's so much information that's circulating online about, I don't know, eat a hot dog and then all of a sudden you eat a hot dog once and then you're going to get cancer. Like, so what actually are outside influences and what is like the actual consumption or exposure level that actually is required for this cancer to actually build in your body per the definition that you were talking about before?
I think it's when it's not balanced, right? If you're doing too much of the bad stuff and not enough of the good stuff, you're going to get yourself in trouble. We're not going to have any answer how many hot dogs can you have before you get in trouble. That's actually going to be individual, right? Certainly it's not one. And it's not going to even be if you had one a week, that's for sure. But it's overall pattern of what you do that matters most. I love the American Institute for Cancer Research because they have the 10 guidelines that basically will help you to prevent cancer. And if you're a survivor, it's the same path that you want to take. And it leans in on the food is medicine. And it's the common sense, eat more vegetables and fruits, get rid of the ultra-processed food, get rid of the processed meat, limit red meat, and avoid sugary sweetened beverages. That's pretty basic. And that's probably not going to get a lot of Instagram hits, truthfully, right? Because it's so boring, right? But I think everyone knows those basic tenets. Move your body more with exercise, watch having too much body fat on your body, and limit, or really truly for cancer prevention, avoid alcohol. Those are going to be the main things based on the American Institute for Cancer
And
Research.
tobacco, right?
And tobacco. We don't even have that in the 10 guidelines because they assume everyone knows that.
But it's coming back.
This is so true. They had to move my hotel room last night because someone was smoking in the room by me. So you're right. This is coming back. Yeah. And on the AICR, they assume that people know that you shouldn't smoke.
And by the way, vaping is even worse than regular cigarette smoke.
Sure is.
So, or pipe smoke or cigars, so tobacco. So I do think that, maybe I think what Don is saying is that actually the common sense tenets that we actually all know are probably the safest way not to stress out, but live a healthy life that counters some of the things that could contribute to developing a clinical cancer. And it's not hard. It's very accessible. You don't have to be a wealthy person. You don't have to be royalty. These things are all under our control. But we need institutions to back those common sense things, and I think that that's where the debate about big food, I don't actually think it's the food industry's responsibility or a food company's responsibility to talk about how bad their ultra processed food is. That's not they're in the business to make money. They should be selling their stuff. But I do think that who are the other people to educate? We need other voices. We need amplification, whether it's education, whether it's sort of public service messaging, whether it's community messaging. I think there's lots of places in the community, whether it's the church, whether it's the hairdresser salon, wherever we get our information.
I actually take healthy food to my hairdresser. I took them Zen basil seeds the last time I was there, and so they're all eating these Zen basil seeds now that are super high in fiber, protein, omega-3s. So you're right. We should hang around with people that carry on the same healthy lifestyle. But I do think what I would say is when patients come in to see me, the number one thing that they want to talk about is food. People are so curious. Food is love. Food is connection. And what I find it does not have to be more expensive to eat healthy, but it's going to take more time. And we were just talking about earlier how everyone is on fast paced. Everyone needs to become and become and become. But we need to pause and be and get back to some of the basics and spend that time in the kitchen to prepare healthy food.
Learn how to cook.
Learn how to cook. Read those labels. I mean, I love your videos showing time to cook. And this can be an opportunity to be creative and art. It can be very meditative. You can involve your whole family, but people have got to get busy in the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about food, you brought up big food and stuff like that. I mean, for the amount of misinformation that goes around in the media landscape, it does seem like there are certain things that are unique about the era that we're living in. I mean, the rise of the ultra-processed food industry and the studies that link ultra-processed food to adverse health outcomes. I mean, we're in New York, so people probably walk more here, but like things like living sedentary lifestyles, the invention of the car, just like there's a lot of technological advancements that have happened over the past 50 years that seem like they are putting us in the wrong, even if they're convenient and stuff like that, putting us on the wrong path. How would you think about how the modern world has changed and how that affects our cancer risk?
I think that's a really good prompt for a question for us, because a lot of the things that we take for granted haven't been around as long as we think they have. I mean, pharmaceuticals, like life-saving antibiotics for infection, they've only been around 100 years. Okay. And it's really kind of crazy that everything that we use, we prescribe that are life-saving in hospitals have really been around for less than a century. And so, I'm somebody that believes that we learn a lot from history, and by having that kind of rear view mirror perspective, we call it the retrospectoscope. Sometimes you kind of like refer back to, you have gratitude for where we are today by looking at what we didn't have before. And then you have excitement about the future by looking at where the unmet needs are today and where the science is going to take us. But here, think about this. If I told you we've only had pharmaceuticals for about 100 years, okay. Think about 1926. Okay. And before that, what we had in the hospitals were very, very rudimentary at best. All right. What did we have before that? We really had primarily diet and lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't have antibiotics. And so infection was a major cause of death. A lot of people didn't make it to even our age sitting around this table because we got wiped out by infection. So again, I think the important insights are on the nuances. We often hear about like we're over dependence on pharmaceuticals, and pharmaceutical comes to the bad guys and big food's the bad guys. Honestly, scalable access to food, scalable access to drugs, they've all been actually very beneficial in some ways. What I think we have now maybe is the opportunity to have a sharper focus on what are the good aspects of that and where do we need to maybe be more cautious about some of those things.
No, I completely agree with everything that you're saying. I mean, I have had a lot of time with patients clinically, and have had both patient as well as in the lab. And so it's always exciting for me to be in that space with a patient. And what I find for a lot of folks is when it comes to big food, what's happened is it's actually going to hack the palate. And so food for Americans has really been centered a lot on pleasure nowadays. And so when it comes to big food, it really has that focus. And the majority of big foods are built on pleasure. They do research in a food lab, and they're doing EEGs or various MRIs even to look for when the bliss point is hit. And they know that's when they've perfected the food. And a lot of those ingredients are the ingredients in question. Some of the ingredients that...
And then they make it convenient.
And then they make it convenient so it can be on the shelf for longer periods of time, and preparation is fast. But there was an interesting study, and again, these are observational studies, but when it comes to, causation equals correlation, there are some observational studies with the ultra-processed foods. I mean, we don't need to do a randomized controlled study. We'll never do one. There's hundreds of thousands of people. This had 95,000 individuals in a French cohort, and it showed mono and diglycerides, those who had more versus those who had less. It doesn't mean that you can never have it, but just don't overdo it. Mono and diglycerides are ubiquitous in so many foods, including baby formula. A lot of the vegan foods are plant-based foods. So you've got to read the label. But what it showed, it was linked, associated, it's not necessarily causing, but linked to a 24% increased risk of breast cancer and a 46% increased risk of prostate cancer. Now, again, these are relative risks. These aren't absolute risks. But the point here is that's nothing that should even be in the food system. We shouldn't even have it there. The one thing I always say is in those wrap sandwiches, and what hurts me is when I see a patient who's really trying to be healthy. And so they're making this healthy wrap sandwich. Who would think that a whole wheat wrap has that monodiglyceride, but it's the thing that makes it kind of stretchy.
Yeah.
Some of the vegan yogurts, the vegan ice creams, people are becoming vegan or plant-based because they think it's healthy. And then these ingredients are hidden in those foods. I find that hurtful because I think it's deceitful in a way that it's not obvious to the majority of people what these ingredients are.
And that's why I think that helping the public, helping patients and their caregivers, their family members, friends, make the process of identifying healthy choices. If you make it common sense and easy, and you try to take some of the mystery and the magic and the outrage out of it too, I think it makes it more straightforward. You were just talking about the plastic wrap and the whole thing about the plant-based food things. I often hear from people, "Oh my gosh, like everything seems to be dangerous, and can we do anything these days?" And if you get people to that level of despair, they just don't care anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
Life's too short. And so I think that an important part of what we need to be able to do from a messaging perspective, what podcasts can help do, is really to make people feel empowered. If you put the power in people's hands and in their pocket too, so they don't feel like it's inaccessible, I think that that's something that can make people feel more confident in making good choices.
I think that's so important what you just said. And, what's so interesting is I start off saying it's so easy, it shouldn't be that complicated, but it turns out it is. Even something as simple as vegetables and fruits, 90% of people don't get enough. Or fiber, there's different numbers out there. Anywhere between 12 to 17% of individuals are getting enough fiber. So essentially, the majority of Americans are not getting enough fiber. So it's a very low number. And fiber, the lack of it is probably what's really driving a lot of this colorectal cancer. And it's just voided in the majority of these ultra-processed foods.
And not just colorectal cancer. I sometimes will use, fiber. Let's pick that up. Let's pick that thread up right there, because I think it's a useful example that can take us into some really good territory for this conversation. Fiber, we've known for years, decades. It's good for regularity, so you're not constipated. Fiber is good for heart health, to make sure your lipids go down. But actually, we now know that probably fiber's biggest impact is really on gut health with your gut microbiome. And your gut microbiome, the 39 trillion bacteria, are basically an army of super soldiers that are doing things that no trainer can actually do for you, no doctor, no healthcare system can do for you. Like, it's all happening inside our bodies. So part of the showing up for ourselves is having our gut bacteria being able to show up to help our health. So what do? Like, this gut bacteria with enough fiber, they chew up this fiber and they produce something called short-chain fatty acids, and they actually lower inflammation. So it doesn't matter what else you think of, what kind of supplement you're taking, your gut can actually make a better supplement. You only need to take a supplement, an anti-inflammatory supplement, if your gut isn't doing the full job that it should be doing. So you can enhance that. So where do you get fiber? Well, you get them from plant-based foods. You're not going to get an ultra-processed food delivering a lot of fiber to you unless it's been added. And so back to Don, what Don was saying is, like, how many people, and I really try to do this whenever I make a video and put it on social, where I'm at a store or something, look at the ingredient label. Anything I pick up, I literally will look at the ingredient label, even though I recognize it, just to double check. Is this something I want in my body? Is it giving me what I want to have? And is it giving me something I don't want to have?
I love that. And I always say, if you see me in the grocery store, I will be looking at everything. And I spend time in the grocery store, so I always make sure that there's no added sugar. And I look at grams of fiber. And this is what I always tell my patients. If it has 3 grams of fiber, that's pretty good, actually. It's actually really hard to find a packaged food with 3 grams of fiber. So I tell people, if it has less than that, don't bring it home. If it has more than 5, that's actually great.
Yeah.
Nothing has that much fiber.
And you know what? Like, to bring that to life in a way that actually makes sense. So there was a study that showed how important fiber is, that was published by the MD Anderson Cancer Center, looking at a clinical study of people with melanoma, so not colon cancer, but melanoma, skin cancer, that had spread. And what they were doing is actually seeing if the dietary intake of people who were being treated with melanoma using an immune therapy could make a difference. And let me kind of help to connect the dots here. Immunotherapy is not chemo. Immunotherapy activates one of your body's own shields, your own immune system, the other army of super soldiers patrolling your body, your immune system to go take out the cancers. The immune system talks to your gut bacteria because 70% of our immune system is actually found in our gut. That wasn't taught to me when I was in medical school, but we now know that. So our gut bacteria talks to our immune system, and if you treat the gut bacteria the right way by feeding them fiber, if you got a pet dog, cat, parakeet, goldfish, you're feeding them every day, we're feeding our gut bacteria every single day. You probably wouldn't feed your dog the junkiest stuff, but we sometimes don't make good choices to feed our gut bacteria. So fast forward to show you that what we feed, what we eat, feeds our gut, what our gut does, talks to our immune system. What our immune system does is respond to immunotherapy if you've got cancer. So I've just kind of I've created the pearl necklace by stringing all the beads together. Now, this study by the MD Anderson Cancer Center found that the amount of fiber you eat from food can make a big difference in terms of your response and survival to immunotherapy. In fact, for every 5 to 6 grams of dietary fiber, there's like up to a 30% decrease in mortality that can occur. So this is something that, cancer patients always ask their doctors. And, sadly, too many doctors say, don't worry about it. Like nothing works for your diet, for just make sure you don't lose weight. Go out and eat as much cake or fast food as you want. Nothing could be further from the truth. So when you talk about 5 to 6 grams of dietary fiber, which is a pretty good, if you find it in a packaged food in the middle aisle of the grocery store, that could be good for you. Put it in the context that amount, whether you get it from a fruit or vegetable or some other source, actually could have a meaningful difference if you're actually suffering from cancer or getting immunotherapy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I know when I was saying earlier, the average, American only gets 12 to 17 grams of fiber, but about 90% of Americans don't get enough fiber. And women want about 25 grams, men 30 grams. And I still think that's pretty low. The majority of people eating a plant-based diet, not vegan, just a plant-predominant, healthy Mediterranean diet, are getting at least 40 grams. But, the vegetables, the fruits, the whole grains, beans, those original immunotherapy studies were so... I'm going to use the word cute to me in a way because it's so interesting how we think allopathically, because before we really realized, this was early on, they found that, wait a minute, people responding to immunotherapy, they have more diverse gut microbiome. So everyone went on probiotics. They're like, wait a minute, people aren't really responding as well. And they looked back and they're like, wait a minute, it turned out it was people eating beans that were actually having the best response, already these natural foods. So I think that's so cool. There was, again, going back to whenever you hear about a study, how many people are in the study? Last year, there was an amazing study with 17 million individuals, and it was an umbrella review. And it showed, the number one reason cancer survivors die, men and women die, we all pass away, is heart disease. And it showed there was about a 28% reduced risk of dying from heart disease, 28% reduced risk of pancreas cancer risk, as well as diverticular disease. But that's pretty powerful. I mean, we know fiber is so important for that metabolic health. There was another study that said exactly that it helps to optimize metabolic health. And what do we hear so many people say? Go on a keto diet. A keto diet is very low in fiber because they're not getting any carbohydrates. You can't get enough fiber generally on a keto diet. And so this is very concerning. This study had overweight and obese individuals, and it showed that, yes, fiber was very magic for helping them lose that weight. And they had improved metabolic indices, including insulin levels, hemoglobin A1C levels, which is the average blood sugar over a 3-month period of time, better lipid markers. And then when it came to cancer, it showed those people that got more fiber had a 22% reduced risk of cancer, 17% reduced risk of dying from cancer. These are all studies produced last year, all large, high-quality studies. So, I think fiber is one of the most important things to really pay attention to in your diet and really get that wide variety of plant foods to help you hit that target.
Now, does all of this... I mean, cancer is often talked about as this kind of like monolith, but I mean, if you isolate like where cancer shows up in your body, also seems to have a big impact on survival rates and how quickly you'll recover. And so what you guys are talking about, does that universally apply and like have beneficial a factor for the entire body, or is it a matter of like the way that these different cancers manifest in your body are sort of like unique?
Every cancer is a little bit different, but also every cancer is a little bit the same. And I think that, if that sounds confusing, that's actually part of the complexity for cancer researchers to try to figure out what are some of the common hallmarks of cancer. You've heard about hallmarks of aging for longevity. Even before that, there was hallmarks of cancer. There were once a dozen. Now there's like 24 of them. And the more we look at it, the more we start realizing that there are these common elements. These common elements actually respond to different forces in the body, including our gut, our immune system, our vascular system, inflammation, which is, often, I would say, I would take a pause here for a second and put a footnote to say there's so many memes on social media about health and wellness. This idea that inflammation is the root cause of disease. Yes and no. It's not the root cause of every disease, and it's not even maybe the root cause of a disease, but we do see it very commonly. And even like this whole idea of like association isn't causation, well, okay, it's true, but there's something important to be taken out of the associations as well, associations and causation, and I think that this is where the expert dialogue, we're having a little bit of an expert dialogue with Dawn and I having this conversation. So I'm very conscious of not diving into shop talk, on a podcast. But I think it shows you just how complex the topic of cancer prevention, treatment, diet, appropriate diet are. And that's coming from two people who really know the field really, really well. You can imagine having somebody on a podcast who doesn't have the depth of knowledge we might have or experience, how easy it would be to oversimplify and make a really juicy soundbite, and then you don't really know where to go from there. So if it sounds complicated, it's because it is complicated, and yet there are some simple things that we can actually do to lower our relative risk, as they say.
Well, I guess in simplest terms, you guys are talking about fiber in the gut microbiome. So in focusing on those things, is that going to help you reduce your risk of breast cancer?
Absolutely. The fiber is very significant. Okay. In fact, with breast cancer patients, breast cancer survivors, they showed for every 10 grams, there was a 13% reduced risk of dying from breast cancer. So the same thing. That was very similar to the other statistic you shared. So, and why is the fiber important? Again, it goes back to that gut microbiome. It's going to help to regulate properly the immune system. And then beyond that, the metabolic health. The metabolic health is so important. And I am a big advocate for a plant-predominant diet within that constraint that when you're doing plant foods, you've got to pay attention to that metabolic health. And you want to do more of those high fiber carbohydrates, those complex carbohydrates, not the refined carbohydrates, because it's better from a metabolic standpoint. What does that mean? Because that word's really confusing. So we want to think of your blood sugar regulation. What is your blood sugar doing? And maybe that is a hard thing for some people to understand. But when I'm working with cancer patients who are doing more of a plant-based diet, if they have pre-diabetes or diabetes, that's something you definitely want to get under control for everyone, truly.
Why? Like if you were to speak to a traditional oncologist and I guess in some ways, you guys are talking about functional medicine, integrative medicine, and the importance of food. Why in certain spheres of the medical community would these things not be focused on? I
think it's changing. Medicine, a lot of people don't realize that medicine is a continuously evolving practice. And a lot of people don't understand that standard of care, which is what we always want to have, sometimes falls short for conditions that don't have good standards or the care isn't successful. So if you have appendicitis, you want standard of care. If you have a pneumonia, you want standard of care. If you get brain cancer, glioblastoma, you probably don't want standard of care. You want future care, but you don't have time to wait for that. So you have to think carefully about where you can actually find the oncologist who's able to actually be plugged in enough to give you an intelligent set of choices to reach into the future. So again, I think that when it comes to diet and nutrition and lifestyle, I think that the up and coming generation of oncologists are going to be much more fluent than the ones that came when Dawn and I went to school or training. It's going to be different. And unfortunately for people who are listening to this right now, what I would say is that if you have been diagnosed with cancer and you ask appropriately your oncologist what type of dietary interventions you should consider taking on, and you're giving a dismissive answer or a negative answer, I think these days it's up to you to go research it yourself and find voices that can actually help amplify. Because your oncologist might be a super oncologist in a particular area or realm or treatment. And so, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
So you might want to add more water to the bath.
Yeah. In every NIH accredited cancer center, and really truly, I feel the majority of cancer centers nowadays, within the American Society of Clinical Oncology guidelines, the NCCN, all of these guidelines really emphasize healthy living. We know the importance. And again, the American Institute for Cancer Research, I feel, is that great resource for patients. It's very patient-facing, and it breaks it down in simple words. So I feel nowadays, like you said, especially this younger generation, I started the integrative medicine program at Mayo Clinic specific to breast cancer, and I also started the lifestyle medicine residency curriculum. It is awesome, the new generation of doctors, how passionate they are about prevention, how interested they are, not just about their patients, but their own personal life. They are so into their own fitness, their own eating well. It really makes me excited.
That's actually a key thing. When I went to medical school, probably as well, most of the people that were our professors were not in great shape. No. I remember we still had cardiologists who were smoking, and when I was in medical school.
And they would drink Coca-Cola.
And they would drink soda, I always...
Doritos.
I jokingly tell a true story that one of my medical school classmates was... proudly would say he would drink 2 6-packs of diet soda or regular soda every single day. And, it is so horrifying to think about that now and how many years he would have done it in terms of the impact on his metabolism, on his gut health and everything else. And so, but the younger people, it's not just they're learning it for their patients. Like we go to medical school and we memorize a gobsmacking amount of information about drugs and bacteria and clinical medicine and lab results, because we are hopeful it's going to be useful for our patients in the future. These days, the younger people are paying close attention to diet and lifestyle for themselves first. And there's no motivation like that.
But it's so important because as a physician, this is for all young doctors out there, because a lot of young doctors, myself included, we all listen to you, Dr. Lee. You're awesome. Healthcare providers are role models.
Yeah.
They need to take care of themselves. And they're that own empowerment, and then they can use their own strategies. And also, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you don't want to go exercise. Last night I was tired. I didn't want to go exercise. I made myself go exercise. And afterwards I felt great, So we've got to lead by example as healthcare providers.
Mm. So if someone is, on the unfortunate end of receiving a diagnosis for whatever reason that might be, what are the types of cancer that we are genuinely, quote unquote, winning against, or we have effective treatments? And then what are the ones that are more of a question mark as the research currently stands?
Well, look, I think we mentioned this earlier. The earlier you catch or diagnose a cancer, the more likely you're actually going to be able to get on top of it and get towards cure. All right. So number one, early detection is like the key thing. The later you wait for it, even like a well treatable cancer, like I can talk about breast cancer, it's pretty well treated. Like if you catch it early, there's a lot of great things that we can do, but if you wait late, everyone's hands are tied and the outcomes are likely not to be good. So I would say the time factor between, for early detection and intervention is one of the key things. But that said, there are some cancers that are, I would say, notorious in terms of being difficult to treat. And like brain cancer, glioblastoma, even though that's changing. We published a paper in Nature Communications a couple of years ago looking at peptide cancer vaccines and how we can actually bend the curve on that. Early days yet, but the fact that it's possible to do, and even an early study is like so promising for that disease. But brain cancer, pancreatic cancer is another, biliary cancer, gallbladder cancer are also really tricky. The cancers that you can't easily detect until really late are also very, very vexing.
That's right. 70% of the cancers that are the ones people die from are the ones we don't screen from, and finding it early is key. And obviously, screening isn't prevention. Screening is finding it early.
Yeah,
Prevention is
absolutely.
everything else we were talking about, but that doesn't minimize how powerful screening is. And it's the best we have. And women should start their mammograms at 40. And for those women that are at an elevated risk, if there's a family history, if they have increased breast density, if there has been a history of a biopsy with a high-risk breast lesion, if they had previous radiation to their chest for another reason, they need to do MRIs as well. If there's a genetic mutation, those women, they start very, very early with their imaging. At 25, for women with a BRCA gene mutation, they start their breast MRIs. And at 30 mammogram, I get a lot of pushback. People are like, well, you're into integrative medicine. I'm shocked you recommend a mammogram. We still save lives. We still save lives. If we start mammogram between the age of 40 to 50 and we're screening 10,000 women, we're going to save 5.6 lives.
Wow.
Those are lives we're saving.
Yeah, 5
People
lives.
will give pushback, but what about the radiation? We are not causing harm on those magnitudes in terms of losing lives. We're not losing lives as a result of that.
Mhm.
So I am really, really wanting people to be aware of that. And then colorectal cancer screening, starting at 45, we may need to push that back younger.
Yeah.
And, the screening doesn't mean at 45 you have to do a colonoscopy, especially if you don't have a family history or if you don't have any symptoms. There's new stool testing. You do a Cologuard. So I think what happens is a lot of people are scared of the testing because there's these narratives online. People are downing mammograms because of radiation. Again, we're saving lives. And when it comes to colon cancer screening, people automatically think, I have to do a colonoscopy. That's what my grandmother did. No, we have new advancements in early detection. So talk to your doctor about that. It's so important.
And once you actually break the barrier and have your first screening test, if you actually detect something, it might actually be the opportunity to light up your radar that there's some things you could do, not only continuous monitoring. Like if you do get a colonoscopy and you find a polyp, oftentimes you say, well, it's not cancer. It's a good news. We didn't find any cancer. We just found polyps. Well, it doesn't take very much research for you to figure out that polyps are set up for cancer. They'll eventually grow into cancer. So now you want to actually get more frequent screening. And it's a great opportunity to up your exercise and up your fiber and treat your gut microbiome and do anything you can to improve your immune system because, it's up to us. It's not, I think this is the big thing with cancer. We used to sort of say, we are helpless against this mysterious force that takes our lives, and by the time it's diagnosed, it's a death sentence. It's totally not true. It's not like we're getting onto an airplane and we have no control over whether the plane, is going to crash or land. We actually have a huge amount of control over that, and I think that's what part of the message that we're sending is that there's a lot we're learning about cancer. There's a lot we can do to catch it early for early detection for better outcomes. And there's a lot of research that's coming down the pike that actually for people who don't catch it early that actually can do it. And this goes to the idea of clinical trials, like very few percentage of patients who could get into a clinical trial ever get into a cancer clinical trial. And that's really a shame as well, because if your doctor tells you, I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do. We've maxed out the chemo, and then you go home feeling like that's the end of the game. Far from it, because if you take a look at clinicaltrials.gov, which is actually a federal funded website that tackles all the clinical trials that are reportable around the world, and you search your cancer type and you look for actively enrolling or enrolling in the future, you can easily discover trials that your doctor might not know about. And you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find out where the trials are being done.
Yeah, we'll link to that for sure, so people have direct access. I mean, on the topic of like the hopelessness or of people feeling like when this happens to them that it's game over. What I find so fascinating about both of you too is like you didn't just study this and you haven't just worked in this field. You personally survived stage 4 cancer, and your mother also survived stage 4 cancer. So can you take me into your story about what happened with you specifically and how that manifested?
Absolutely. I was obsessed with healthy living as a young girl. So I was really fortunate. My family was very, very healthy. And I would say that's why I'm alive today. And I also never want someone to compare their journey to mine. I came from a family with such deep love and harmony. And so my undergraduate study was in exercise physiology and nutrition. So I learned a lot in undergraduate training. And then I went on to actually do research at the Cooper Institute, studying centenarians that were still running a lot. I went on to naturopathic school because I was a little disenchanted with traditional medicine at the time. And I wanted to learn about traditional healing systems, homeopathy, naturopathy, Ayurvedic medicine. But I really wanted after that to go to traditional medical school. So when I arrived in traditional medical school, it was a few weeks into medical school and I wasn't feeling good. And I went to see a doctor. And I remember it was just so interesting because I said, I'm feeling a little short of breath. I was very athletic my whole life. I was a competitive gymnast. I was a runner. And I would climb Camelback Mountain. I went to medical school in Arizona twice a day, up, down, up, down. And it was effortless. Although all of a sudden I couldn't do it with as much ease. So this doctor never listened to my lungs. He just said, oh, it's adult asthma, use an inhaler. I didn't get better. Saw a second doctor. He said, use the inhaler more. Still didn't listen to my lungs.
He gave you an inhaler without listening to your lungs?
Yes. And no chest x-ray. This is, you can't make this up, right? Second doctor did the same. The same. This is so weird. So now I'm doing Camelback Mountain. I couldn't even go up the first set of stairs. But my heart's like racing from all this albuterol I'm using. So I see a third doctor and he said, it's in your head. It's psychosomatic. This happens to all medical students. And so then it was on my way home from school a few days later that I collapsed. I was taken to the hospital and I was in cardiogenic shock. There was a massive tumor wrapped around my heart. They took me to the operating room. And the next day, it was Thanksgiving weekend 2000. The medical team came in the room, the on-call team, and they said, you have stage 4 diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. This was before rituximab. And we need to start chemotherapy immediately. You don't have time to do any sort of fertility therapies, so you won't be able to have children. You need to drop out of medical schools, like all these absolutes. You know, it was so interesting. I never fought. That's really powerful. There's some report, people do these little interviews like she fought cancer, she battled cancer. Like, there's never that. Zero. I was really curious. I think there was a gift in being a medical student when I was given the cancer because I was kind of curious. Also, I had all this training, exercise, nutrition, naturopathic medicine to say, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And it is what it is. Like, no one knows. And they gave me 3 months to live without treatment, 20 months to live with treatment. So I did chemotherapy with CHOP chemotherapy for many months. And then I did a bone marrow transplant. I remember very distinctly during my bone marrow transplant, it was so powerful. Doctors are such beautiful healers, and the ability for them to connect with the human spirit. Really, Dr. Jeffrey Scriber was my oncologist from the City of Hope who did my bone marrow transplant. It was more or less like a Hail Mary. And he would come in and bring music for me every day. This is when he had cassette tapes. And he would bring me a different genre of music, put it in the cassette player, let me listen to it. He had 2 bicycles, one that was brought into my hospital room and one that was at the nurse's station. And when you have a bone marrow transplant back then, you weren't supposed to ever leave your room because of the pressure in the room was to keep all the organisms out of your room. But he said, go ahead, keep your mask on. You can sneak out each morning and ride that bike and watch the sunrise. So I kept my life normal. I would wake up at 4 a.m. every single morning in the hospital during my bone marrow transplant. I would tiptoe out. And I remember, this is so distinct, looking into the rooms, it was like ICU beds. You could see in all the other rooms. And everyone else was dying in an effort to stay alive. I remember just having this immense vitality. My existence and connection with my aliveness was so attuned. It was a total gift. I would never trade my cancer in. I would never trade it in. And it had some collateral damage. And I wouldn't trade that in either. Because I am more alive, I think, than probably most, if not any human that's on this planet. I've had the most beautiful life. Every sense of mine is so elevated. Just the ability to just experience life is it just illuminates such greatness. So for me, cancer was a massive gift. And I would just encourage everyone, again, not to compare your story to mine, but I became very good at looking at lessons in my adversity. And I just believe that resilience isn't about snapping back. It's more about growing and then rising beyond the adversity to something that's just so magnificent, so truly magnificent. So for me, cancer was like truly a gift. I had this beautiful opportunity to connect with my doctors in a way that I understood what healing was all about. So I feel I became a better doctor. I learned a lot in medical school, but I learned so much more being a patient.
And you had a complete response.
I did. I had complete cure.
How did you go from 3 months to live to this is 25 years later and you're sitting here.
Well, you know what's interesting is they did PET scans on me 10 years following and it was still positive. We finally said, I looked at my oncologist and said, can we stop doing these at this point? So we finally just stopped, because there's always a little bit of residual stuff there, but no, I just don't worry about it. That may sound like flippant to some people, but I'm just not going to worry about it. We weren't going to do anything about it. We weren't going to give me more chemo, right? And I had some heart issues. So we kind of thought it's probably a good idea we stop following this because if you need a heart transplant, we're not going to want to kind of deal with what's there. And so we stopped doing the PET scans. Like you were saying, cancer is kind of always there. You keep things in check. But I had a complete response. I was in a clinical trial. This was one of the early clinical trials that they were investigating if doing early transplantation for very advanced diffuse large B-cell lymphoma would put them into permanent remission because this is the kind of cancer, if they cure it initially and when it recurs, they can't get really good control over it. So I was very, very lucky. It was a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma with the follicular type. So it's kind of these two really bizarre occurrences.
I mean, so, maybe to help translate that for people that are listening that might not be familiar with the vocabulary, basically, lymphoma, like leukemia, is one of the liquid cancers, although it's not really liquid, as opposed to a breast cancer we talked about, colon cancer, brain cancer we talked about. The bone marrow is actually really important because a lot of the cancer cells can start from the bone marrow and then get in and grow in there. And so besides chemo, if you give radiation or other chemo drugs, you can wipe out the cancer cells in the bone marrow. So you need to be able to get rid of all the bad stuff, and then do a transplant to put good, healthy bone marrow back to grow into the bone marrow. It's like cleaning out a garden where you take out all the rotten roots that you don't want to have in the garden anymore, and then you replant. And that's really it's actually a transplant that's quite miraculous because it works, and it can actually revive and resuscitate, someone's health in a remarkable sort of way. So I think that the other thing that Dawn said that's worth calling out is that once you get into a remission, which is that you can't detect the cancer anymore, you do monitoring over time. So like this PET scan, which looks for metabolism, like little light up of signal. It's not looking at a shape of a cancer. It's a defined shape of the cancer, not anatomy. It's looking at signal. Sometimes we see residual signal that'll keep on lighting up. That's actually not cancer. It could be your immune system just staying really active, like you just have a patrol a station of immune super soldiers that are waiting, that have been placed there to be able to hold the fort to make sure nothing bad happens again. And so, I think that the fact I always get really excited and very grateful for medicine when I hear a story like yours, Don, because it just shows you against impossible odds, you can have a remarkable outcome. And for anybody who feels despair, when they get a cancer diagnosis, I think it's important to be positive. That's part of resilience, but also to look at examples of people who made it, and because that's actually the path. Those are the breadcrumbs you want to actually follow.
Well, there's another really important layer on what you just said too. So many individuals, being that my specialty is integrative oncology, would come to see me thinking that they would get out of the chemo. And we know in individuals, especially for the easier to treat cancers, breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, early lung cancer, when they do not have conventional treatment, they forego the treatment and do alternative medicine, that they have a 2.5-fold increased risk of dying. Now with breast cancer, it's a 5.86-fold increased risk of dying because we have such good treatment strategies for breast cancer now. So I love being that example, and say, look, I went through all the conventional therapies. I believe in integrative care. I believe the reason that I had my vitality during treatment was because I still took care of myself. And still to this day, too many oncologists and cancer teams don't encourage patients to eat well during treatment. They need to, especially with immunotherapy. It's critical. The immunotherapy really relies on that gut microbiome. Healthier food is going to keep that gut microbiome more optimized. And exercise during chemo and cancer treatment will help you feel better. It gets rid of brain fog. It helps you have more energy. I was pretty gritty with my patients. If they said, I'm tired, I said, I'm going to force you to exercise, not blood, sweat, and tears, but just to move. Yeah. Just go for a 5-minute walk. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. Just move your body.
That's been shown to correlate with response and survival. And so again, the medical team used to ignore that.
Right.
Now we're leaning into that. And so what we're describing is part of the change, the evolution that's actually happening now as well. So what you might have thought in the past is not what's going on now. And what I'm particularly excited about is really this whole immunotherapy field, which is really changing the future. So today, follicular B-cell lymphoma is not treated with, even though we still use chemo because it does work, but there are these amazing treatments that are approved and used regularly to be able to rescue people that chemo before could not do.
And that's why it's really important for individuals to seek out those clinical trials, because when we're able to do more of the research, they get life-saving therapies and we're able to understand and advance the therapy even more so they're less toxic. So it's really exciting. But going back to that exercise, for breast cancer and colon cancer, there was just that amazing study that was published in 2025 that showed that the exercise in a supervised exercise, structured program was on par with the benefit that individuals receive from chemotherapy. It's huge. We see the same thing with prostate and breast cancer too. It doesn't mean you replace the chemo, but gosh, if you do the traditional treatment plus exercise, it's incredibly powerful. So exercise, it's the goal towards cure. It's going to move you towards cure. So we need to use it as part of the prescription. It's really powerful stuff.
Now, what were the parameters around your mother's case as well? How did that happen?
Well, I've spoken about my mother's case, and she's an example of somebody who received immunotherapy, which we've mentioned a number of times now, where it's not chemotherapy. In her case, she never received chemotherapy, but she, even at the age of 80, received a treatment that unleashes her own immune system, even an 80-year-old immune system, in a way that was capable of reversing a stage 4 cancer to a stage 0 cancer. And I think that it was that dramatic end stage position back to a thriving 0 stage that I never thought I would see in my career, but now I've seen well over a dozen times. She had endometrial cancer, and which is a cancer of the lining of the uterus, and it had spread. And I'm sort of taking a very complicated story and trying to shorten it. But we were on the cusp of looking at new immunotherapies that were being approved. And it used to be that you chose the treatment based on the organ in which the cancer was found, like breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer. It's still a good way to do it. Like, that's how we do it. But in my mother's sort of time, we moved. The FDA actually allowed us to look at markers. If you had markers on your cancer that would signify that you were likely to respond to immunotherapy, didn't matter what organ it came from. Okay. And many patients really need to advocate for their oncologist to look for these markers, because it would instantly qualify you to actually get a different type of treatment that insurance is going to pay for, which is important because it can be expensive. But anyway, for my mother, we took her tumor, we sequenced it, we stained it, we found the under the microscope that she had those markers. And so we used that as a reason, a justification to get immunotherapy. And what was remarkable for her it was a couple of things. Number one, at the age of 80, was stage 4 cancer, where her own previous oncologist said, the treatment is going to be worse than the disease. You should take her on a cruise and just enjoy some time with her while she's, still got good performance status, or sort of be able to enjoy quality of life. I looked at this guy in the eyes and I basically said, because he's not in practice anymore, I said, you know what I do for a living? This is not how I roll. And so we just dove in, found the marker, matched her up with the treatment on an individual personalized way, modified her diet, tweaked it. We actually use a tiny touch of radiation. What does radiation do? Well, if you give high doses of radiation, you can blast away a cancer lickety-split with high dose, sometimes with side effects. What we're beginning to discover now is something that actually was observed for decades. If you give really, really low levels of radiation to a tumor, okay, you're really not killing the cancer. It's like taking sandpaper on the surface of the cancer. You're roughing it up. And you know what that exposes? That exposes the flags on the cancer that your immune system can find. And so this was, so this is actually what we did with her. We gave low dose radiotherapy to a specific sense to activate her immune system even more. And in my mother's case, it was really remarkable. She only received 3 doses of the immunotherapy. And from the scan before the first dose to after the third dose, like everything went from a blizzard, which is the image you kind of see on the scan, to 0, back to normal after 3 treatments. Was just remarkable.
That is.
And it doesn't work for everybody. But we need to figure out how to get everybody to be like that. But the fact that we can do it to an 80-year-old from stage 4, to me, is sort of like, that's the kind of thing that gets me up every day to do my work, because we got to be able to do even more. I never thought we'd see this in my career, not to mention my own mother. But the fact that like that shows me that, maybe we can go after brain cancer, which I know we can. Maybe we can go after pancreatic cancer. And by the way, I'll tell you just sort of like something that is super exciting for me, because I'm a researcher, is that if you don't have those markers for immunotherapy, presently, the oncologist would say, well, you're not going to actually be eligible. You're not going to respond to the immunotherapy. Well, we now know that sometimes tweaking the gut microbiome can actually make you responsive, number one. We don't know exactly everything how to do it yet, but that's an exciting area. Pay attention to what's going on with gut microbiome. But the second thing is that there are treatments, biotech treatments, that can turn a patient who does not have those markers. We call them a cold tumor. They're not going to respond to immunotherapy. And what's remarkable, you can actually turn a cold tumor into a hot tumor so that you can actually use immunotherapy. So not ready for prime time yet, but there are clinical trials. So if you are listening and you've been told that you're not eligible for chemotherapy or immunotherapy because you have a cold tumor, it doesn't have the markers, take a look at those clinical trials that are turning tumors that don't have markers into tumors that do have markers that then will respond to immunotherapy. And to me, that's how fast this whole field is moving.
And then low toxicity too.
And with low toxicity.
Which is amazing.
I mean, I'm so curious. I mean, for you having cancer and then someone so close to you having cancer, I mean, how did that completely shift? I mean, that's not like a small thing to go from stage 4 to stage 0. Has that influenced the way that you guys have approached this and just invigorated you in some way? Like, what has the process been after those experiences?
Well, look, I'm the family member. I'm also a physician. It changed my appreciation in a very personal way of why we need to keep doing the research and keep pushing the field of medicine forward, because we can achieve the impossible becomes possible. And when you see that once, you realize it's possible. Now you really want to go hard at it and to be able to help other people. So, I mean, most of us went into medicine because we want to help people. And when you see something that wasn't doable before, suddenly you can actually do it. It's almost like a mission in life to be able to actually bring that forward to make it possible for more people and better. And, like, I think I'll let you speak for yourself, but, just hearing your story, Don, makes me feel positive, makes me feel hopeful, makes me want to encourage more people to, hear your story, go to your website, like listen to your talks, because this is what people need to do. They need to go from despair to hope, from no hope to hope. That's really something that's so powerful when it comes to the field, when it comes to cancer medicine.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. And, it's been such a gift going through what I went through and to be able to be in that space with a patient in their moment of vulnerability. What a gift and an honor for someone to trust us in that space. And so I would say my biggest success story, what I love the most, is when someone comes in with that fear and they have a strong intention that they're not going to do the chemotherapy. And not that I want to have to force someone to do it, but to help to show them just through my own lived experience and also with the science that it's okay. We found your cancer early, or even if we found it late stage. I have many patients now with the immunotherapy who had, and I'm saying had, right, who had stage 4 cancer, and there's no evidence of disease, breast cancer I'm referring to. And still in oncology, we oftentimes say with breast cancer, you can't cure it. But nowadays, I don't know that we can say that because we've come so far. We have so many advances, and we're seeing cancers go away with no evidence of the cancer present like we never did 10 years ago without the immunotherapy. So I like to say, I really feel I can move people beyond hope to knowing that they too can not only attain their vitality during the cancer treatment if they apply those lifestyle strategies when possible. It's not going to be perfect, but just do your best. And then certainly beyond the cancer diagnosis, they can flourish.
Mm.
And so I just love being that beacon of true lived hope to knowing that they too can live in that same spirit and realm. And I think really be able to live in a capacity that maybe their life never would have afforded them before. It's a different understanding when you're faced with your impermanence or with your mortality. The the sublime aspect of life, just the preciousness of it, really becomes much more real to you.
Mm.
So
There's I love when, the work of one guest sitting in front of us like connects to like another work. Ellen Langer, who works at Harvard, she's kind of been coined the mother of mindfulness and kind of at the forefront of mindset research. I mean, you guys are talking about hope and despair and all this stuff. And she's famous because she did the counterclockwise study that went back like 50 years. And basically, they retrofitted this environment and they put, I don't know how old they were, like 75, 80-year-old men or something like that in this environment. And then they retrofitted it for it to be 20 years earlier. And so what they found in that study, dating back 50 years, was that their physical markers, like their physical health markers, actually improved because their mindset radically changed. They actually like thought they were younger. They were behaving as if they were younger. And there's so much research into this as went into after that study, but I think the idea is that if you are so hopeless about cancer and you're so hopeless about these diagnoses, I wonder what effect that actually has on your results. Not to say that like your depressed mood is going to make you like die of cancer, but I wonder if the spontaneous remission stuff that you're talking about, I wonder if these mindsets that we have influence stress levels, which influences the body. How do you guys think about that entire dynamic about our mindsets?
There's a whole field called psychoneuroimmunology that basically ties together, your psychology with how your nerves, how the brain communicates with the rest of your body, and how your immune system reacts. And we spend a lot of time talking about how important the immune system is to prevent and also to treat cancer. Clearly, your mental state plays a big role. And I do think that that's something that support systems can be very important for, and starting with the doctor, with the patient. And that's a whole other discussion in a way. How do we get doctors to be more compassionate and to learn how to support patients in a health system that is ever more pressured to be fast and to serve up, fast food healthcare. That doesn't work for serious disease. And it certainly doesn't, it's not a balm for the mental load that people carry when they've been given a cancer diagnosis.
Mm.
Yeah, that's right. And we know from research that optimism, which optimism actually isn't an active word, but having that mindset improves outcomes from any cause by 15%. Reduces overall mortality by 15%. Now, hope is actually more powerful because hope is when you go into action. You're actually putting it to the test and you're doing the things that move the needle. And so that's very, very important. But even things like gratitude and faith, we know that all of that matters. And again, it goes back to, I think faith is an important thing to lean in on because with faith, it removes isolation. You have community, which we know that community and connection, both social connection as well as social connection in kind of this horizontal realm, as well as if you think of like Lisa Miller's work with the spiritual realm, she's done a lot of beautiful work.
She's been on here like 3 times. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful work. And I'm so grateful to her work because a lot of folks will think that spirituality can be a little woo-woo, but it's not. We have biology and science that shows that no, this makes a difference. And so I think that all of this matters when it comes to cancer. And what's interesting is when an individual has gone through cancer, they start to kind of turn over some of these things because it gives them that hope.
Yeah. Now, so if you were to think about, I mean, there's so many things that have come up. I mean, I'm thinking about the fiber, the microbiome. We're talking about nutrition and food and exercise. We're talking about mindset. Do you guys look at all these things like equally as a toolbox to face cancer, or are there certain things that are like 100% non-negotiable? Are there things that we're not talking about that we should also add in there in terms of,
we covered so much. I think that health is the result of a lot of things, a lot of gears turning in the background. And, when we wake up and we feel good and we go through our day and our week in a healthy way, we often don't appreciate how much has gone on behind the scenes inside our body and inside our minds as well, as we've just discussed. I'm sure there's more to be discovered of like what we can actually do to fine tune our ability to stay healthy, to prevent cancer, to optimize cancer outcomes. And we haven't even gone to actually how to prevent cancer from coming back. That's secondary prevention.
Yeah.
That's also a whole other important conversation. If we're seeing more people, survive late stage cancer, how do we prevent that cancer from coming back or other cancers from developing? As you survive one, you get older, you're more likely to be susceptible to other ones as well. This is why cancer research is never going to lose its momentum. I think there's a false notion that I've heard this many times, like drug companies don't want to cure cancer because it keeps them in business. You know what? I think there's so much business to be had that everybody kind of joins forces to try to figure out how do we actually get the progress going forward. There's a lot of research that remains to be done. And especially as we start seeing this trend of cancer diagnosed earlier, it does kind of raise an alarm and it gets us jumping a little bit to be more responsive to figure out what's going on. We haven't talked about microplastics. We haven't talked about environmental toxins, all the climate change, environmental change, all those things that are actually going on are all also factors that impact what's going on inside our bodies that can alter our health defenses. So I like to kind of keep it simple. Anything we can do to boost our shields, improve our health defenses is a good thing when it comes to cancer and other diseases as well. Does it mean that you have to be kind of, quote, religiously addicted to only one ultra healthy behavior or orthorexic eating where you're only focused on healthy? No, because the more you spend time boosting your health defenses, you can actually wander off the reservation and do something not so healthy for you. It's about resilience. You'll bounce back.
Well, I agree. And I think oftentimes when people come in with this, I'm going to be perfect with my diet and perfect with, they have so much stress around that. They're turbulent is what I would say. I just want you to have ease and harmony and joy and, lean into it because it's meaningful to you. But we didn't talk about sleep, and sleep is another important one because a lot of my patients who they eat really good and their exercise really good, they are, really overachievers in their work and they're not sleeping. And I think we're probably all at the table a little guilty for that.
Yeah.
But sleep is really important when it comes to the biology of cancer. Again, going back to the immune system, melatonin is important for the body, and then also metabolic optimization. And so when people aren't sleeping properly, even when they're eating properly, you can see that their blood sugar controls, again, aren't as ideal. So you got to pay attention to sleep.
And there are cortisol levels, and sleeping actually is the opposite of inactivity. We might not be physically moving, but inside our bodies, our gut microbiome is rebooted. Our immune system is being fine-tuned. Even in our brain, a lot of people don't realize this, but we have a sewer system in our brain called the glymphatic system that when we're sleeping deeply, the sewer system opens up and it drains the toxins from our brain that accumulated from just the day's activity. And anybody who's ever pulled an all-nighter or had a bender or shifted time zones and not slept, you realize just how brain foggy you feel is because you didn't get a good night's sleep. And if that is actually kind of like an indicator of what didn't happen in your body, you can imagine we're just a little bit more inflamed the next day or not getting a good night's sleep.
I always say it's like your brain's getting its bath. It needs 7 hours of sleep, about that for the brain to truly get rid of those toxins. It's a very, very important aspect of optimization.
Yeah, over the past year, that's one thing that I've looked into more, and I'm just surprised at the amount of research because it's something that's very under talked about compared to nutrition or exercise, and it seems like the body of work behind sleep is pretty extensive. So,
sleep ties to everything else we've talked about today. In fact, I would argue that one of the biggest unmet needs in terms of healthy lifestyles, there needs to be a whole new profession of sleep coaches that actually are out there to really be able to work with people, not just when you're having a problem, but, I think a college student could use a sleep coach.
Yeah, we all could probably use
Yeah.
a sleep coach. It's so important, and it's sleep regularity. And at every large city, there's longevity clinic, but sleep improves healthy aging by 48%. And everyone's looking for these very expensive, magic bullets, but something as simple as sleep really, really matters in this overall equation. So you can't forget the basics.
Your alarm clock is the ultimate biohack.
Yeah, exactly. And that sleep regularity, where just try to get up at the same time every day, and then your body will kind of be regulated to go to bed at the same time each day. But you got to prioritize that.
Now, we talked about misinformation earlier and the media landscape, but are there things that are legitimately a threat to people? Like, you consume this enough, you are definitely raising like your cancer risk, and what would those things be for
I would
you
say
guys?
alcohol. You don't want to overdrink. You don't want to overconsume alcohol. I enjoy a glass of wine, and people are like, "Whoa, you've had cancer." No, but I live with balance. I get in a car and I put on my seatbelt because that's probably the safest way I should be in a car. I think there's risk with everything in life, and so you don't want to overdo it. But I would say alcohol is one that you definitely need to be mindful of because it is a carcinogen. That would be one.
Yeah, I mean, and I like that way of saying it. It's I'll give you an analogy, not with a diet and lifestyle, but with equally important consequences. It's kind of like, is there anything that's non-negotiable that's guaranteed to actually cause you a problem? If you don't follow the traffic rules and you're speeding all the time, you're probably going to kill yourself or get into a serious accident. And I think that's true for most of the things that we know that we probably shouldn't do very much. If you do it all the time, it's probably going to take you into the woods kind of thing, in a bad way. So there's no one thing that's going to be, I mean, honestly, you always hear the people who, like I'm amazed, by the way, if you take a look at musicians today that were abusing their bodies in the 1970s, like those rock stars that you would think, I mean, look at Mick Jagger, and all these other people, they seriously partied and they were somehow able to become resilient. And then you find out how they live their life now. They're actually really exercise and diet and sleep focused, and, they really take care of themselves. And so I think what I'm trying to say is that our bodies are remarkably resilient. It will try as hard as it can to go back to baseline in a healthy way. Try as hard as we can to abuse it. But if you want to know how to dodge problems, don't abuse your body.
Yeah.
Now, on the screening end, I wanted to spend a little time there. I mean, what should someone who's listening right now be doing? Let's just take the younger people. Like you mentioned the thing about mammograms and colonoscopies and stuff like that. Like, do you feel like we're at a point where people that are under 40 should be doing some serious things, blood tests, other things to monitor their health, or is that kind of extreme? What would you say about that?
It's really tricky because some people don't have access and some people can't afford to do it. So what I would say in this situation is listen to your body, pay attention. If you're not feeling good, always see a doctor and make sure you're heard, right? When I saw a doctor, I wasn't heard. So make sure you're heard and that they validate that with the appropriate tests. I do believe in doing just basic screening blood work. I think it's a very nice thing to do with your primary care doctor. It just depends on insurance and guidelines if they will allow everyone to just have basic screening laboratory studies. I like a CBC, but it's funny. Most doctors will do a CBC is looking at the blood count, the hemoglobin, looks at your white blood cell count, and then the cells that help to clot the blood. And they'll just stop there. They don't look at the breakdown of those cells. So I like to see the differential of what those immune cells are doing. I think that's very helpful. I think it's good to look at the electrolytes. I think it's important to look at the kidney function, to look at the liver, maybe get your thyroid screened. When it comes to vitamin D, it's interesting. You'll hear a lot of folks on social media say that vitamin D reduces the risk of cancer occurring. There really hasn't been large cohort studies or meta-analyses that have proven that. What it has proven is that vitamin D will improve survival among cancer survivors. We know that. Now, I think what I would also want to back that up and say, if you have vitamin D deficiency, you need to correct it. And the majority of people do have vitamin D deficiency because if they are outside, they're doing sunscreen or they have a hat or something that's avoiding them from getting that, appropriate vitamin D synthesis. Vitamin D is really not a vitamin, it's more of a hormone. So those are the basic blood panels that people get. But if something doesn't feel right, then you want to go deeper. We're in this era of full body MRI and early cancer detection. Those things all cost a lot of money. And there is the concern with overdiagnosis with those. However, we've talked about earlier, finding things early can be a really great thing. We need more data. So all of these centers that are doing these full body MRIs, they really owe it to themselves to follow those metrics and to capture that longitudinal data to show how many cancers, when you're doing those full body MRIs in these otherwise healthy people, are you finding that are saving life-threatening disease. So I'm now the chief medical officer at a longevity clinic called Fountain Life, and we find 14.4% of the individuals have these life-threatening conditions. It's very interesting, and we find about 4% of those individuals actually have a cancer. Now, there's a lot of overdiagnosing.
Is that with full body MRIs?
Full body MRIs and GRAIL, which, the GRAIL is a early cancer circulating tumor DNA. So we need more science here, and so why am I doing this? I'm doing this to capture the data and to try to understand more what this pattern looks like. Again, finding any cancer, that's saving a life. And that's meaningful to me. But we have to figure out ways to be within testing that isn't finding all these false positives, right? And we have to also figure out a way to democratize this, because right now people have to pay a lot of money and that doesn't feel really good. So I really want to be present in this space to try to advance the science. It's a little tangled right now, but you have to try to figure out how we can do this with some finesse so that one day we can be able to go to policy and help this to be something that's approved by everyone, or get these better tumor markers that are just simple blood tests to be able to tell people.
Well, I agree with everything that Dawn just said. Blood tests are interesting because most doctors test only a handful of markers. A typical visit to your GP, primary care doctor, even oncologist, actually, unless they're looking for something. But we actually have knowledge about many more markers than we actually test for. And so this is the balance of, how do you get the right amount of information? What's too much information? What's unnecessary information? How do you balance with the cost? And so, there's a pragmatic aspect of it as well. I like to also think about adding inflammatory markers. So if you look at high sensitivity CRP, even if somebody seems to feel okay, if that's elevated, that might actually be a signal that something else is going on, that you might circle around and ask in more detail, because we don't pick up everything even on a first conversation with a patient. But if you saw that high sensitivity CRP was way up, you might want to have that. You might want to circle back to say, hey, wait a minute, let's take another look to see if something else might be going on, and something that might have been discounted or dismissed the first time around, like, oh no, actually, now that you bring it up, I didn't ask that before. So, it's a challenge, I think, in healthcare to be able to deliver the best possible care to the most amount of people. Most of the universal health system or governed health systems, they give very good care to everyone, but they don't give state-of-the-art care to everyone. And so how do we as a society balance that? Well, I would argue that some of the people that are the entrepreneurs who've made, you can get your own blood tests done and you can order 160 different blood tests or whatever. Okay, what are you going to do with that information? Who's qualified to help guide you interpreting everything? You need to have all those pieces in place, so you're not just the underinformed consumer being faced with a lot of data that you don't know what to do with.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that you brought up the inflammatory markers. And in my cancer patients, I would also check an interleukin-6, which is a really nice marker. I was really able to correlate when things maybe were starting to tilt in a direction that weren't as favorable. I like homocysteine levels as well. And then I didn't mention the metabolic markers. So I always like to get hemoglobin A1Cs as well as insulin levels. And then the lipid profile. Again, we're talking about cancer, but the number one reason men and women die is because of heart disease. So checking the cholesterol panel, and I would say one of my favorite parts of the cholesterol panel is actually triglycerides. The free floating, fatty acids is just so important. I also like that apoprotein B and that lipoprotein little a, and I could probably keep on talking because I actually tend to check a lot of labs. But you know what? A really cool lab that I check is beta carotene. Back in the 1980s and 90s, there was some research around beta carotene as a surrogate for health-related quality of life. And so what I found in my ladies with breast cancer is if their beta carotene was over 50, it was, number one, a really beautiful marker for me to know when they were getting their vegetable and fruit consumption. But anytime it was over 50, they would have more joy. It's really the coolest thing. So I don't know. I had a lot of fun with it, So if they were less than 50, it didn't mean that they were just miserable, but it mean they needed to take care of themselves a little bit more. And when it would bump up, it was cool.
You're bringing up a whole brand new field of medicine that you're proposing, which are blood markers for joy.
It's the cool. This is like old research. It was something that, because again, as a kid, I was really fascinated with this. So I followed Linus Pauling and all this early, data, and I just thought it was always interesting. And it's a hard blood test to draw, and so we were just kind of it was such a gift being a physician at Mayo Clinic, because we had access to doing a lot of research, drawing these markers and finding these really cool patterns. And it was something that even among women with stage 4 disease, and that beta carotene was over 50. Yeah, they were doing better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of stuff. I mean, I started doing function health about a year and a half ago, which Mark Hyman's company. But that measures like 130 blood markers, and which is interesting because the standard physical measure is like 16. And so, I mean, I directly benefited from what you were talking about with the heart markers, because the standard one is just like a few, and then mine were elevated, and I'm like, I don't really know why. And then the one with function broke down like every single individual thing. And then there's, the full body MRIs, like you were saying, Pronovo and some of the other ones, like, yeah, that costs like $1,000, $3,000. But if you think about how much health insurance costs, which it could be like enormous for people every year, like $12,000, $15,000. I personally don't know why this is such like controversial. Of like, why are we doing so much prevention? It's just kind of like, well, why not? I mean, I guess your point, what you were saying, is like knowing what to do with it. I guess at some level, AI could help. Obviously, the information has to be correct from AI, but we're in an era where it's like every single person, every doctor can't cover 10,000 people, right? So like AI could be like a personal thing and helping you work through some of the stuff, but yeah.
Well, with what I'm doing now, we have a massive AI cloud that helps us to collect the data, and it's 15 billion data points that it's collected. And this is when it gets really fun. But, going back to the full body MRI, I mean, it's pretty neat when you look at the accelerated brain age and the hippocampus. 25% of the healthy individuals coming in had accelerated brain age. We don't know this unless you look, right? And it's with lifestyle, a lot of stuff can be reversed. So 46% of these individuals, it improved over 18 months. And the hippocampus, kind of gets, because they weren't sleeping, and people start improving that sleep hygiene. It gives them motivation, like, I've got to pay attention. I can't get on my phone, or I can't watch that last Netflix before I go to bed. I'm going to go to bed at 10 o'clock tonight because I've got to get up at 6 o'clock. So you can get that 7-8 hours of sleep, whatever it is. But this is really important. I'm a big believer in diagnostics, and I want to be in that space to try to help it so that it becomes affordable for everyone. That's what we have to do.
Yeah. Well, the two last beats that I want to cover, one is, let's just say someone has it, right? If there was a general kind of Cliff Notes overview of what you would give of what are like the emerging treatments and things that we are seeing. I mean, you mentioned immunotherapy that came up multiple times. That would be helpful to people. And how would you help people walk through, they just got a cancer diagnosis, and like what to do next?
Those are two big questions.
Yeah.
Like in a 2-minute soundbite, it's difficult. I mean, what I would say is that there's a lot going on in cancer research, and anybody who's listening that wants to actually find out where to go look for this, because it's changing all the time. I would say if you look at that clinicaltrials.gov site and search a particular cancer of your interest, you'll find out very quickly what are the studies that are going on and what the treatments actually are. That might be a helpful way. And then there's a couple of conferences and organizations. The AICR for prevention is a really good organization with resources online you can actually search. A couple of conferences that go on every spring, summer. There's Don mentioned earlier, the American Society for Clinical Oncology, ASCO. That conference is really kind of like the the prow of the ship of all the clinical data that's coming out. Most people don't attend that conference, but if you pay attention and take a look at all the news releases that come out around that period of time, you can glean a lot of clues on where the next directions are coming from. You don't have to be an investor. If you are an investor, you'll find out a lot about what's going on, but because people are putting out lots of press releases. But people are thinking about diet and lifestyle as well. And then the AACR, the American Association of Cancer Research, is also a great organization with a big conference with a lot of press releases coming out. So I think, rather than sort of say, here are 5 directions that everyone needs to look for, I would say, here's a way to look for the directions. Yeah. That's probably the most useful way to think about it.
It's really important. Being that my focus is more integrative oncology, focused on lifestyle, I love to refer people back to the American Institute for Cancer Research because it's very actionable. I think it's very important for individuals to take part in support groups and talk with their cancer center about meeting with a nutritionist, meeting with a cancer rehabilitation specialist or a physical therapist. All of the cancer centers have these individuals to support you. A lot of times it's just so busy in that appointment that those appointments just don't get ordered. And then a cancer psychologist. This is a very difficult time to navigate, and you shouldn't just sit there with those emotions by yourself. Let a professional help to guide you. That's what I would say. I think we really leaned in on the importance of lifestyle. Food is medicine, moving, getting adequate sleep, avoiding those obvious toxic exposures. But then at the end of that, always focusing on the importance of connection, love, joy, harmony, faith, and then staying playful, keeping life a little bit light.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to come back to that because you said that cancer was a teacher, and I think that a lot of people probably clicked into this. The fear, the despair, the hopelessness, the headlines, a lot of the stuff. I mean, we've really covered a lot of the high level of, what you could do, the prevention, a lot of the misnomers around this. But if we were to come back to that, like how to even perceive this to begin with, what would you say to people? What would you want them to know?
So, for me, when I say that cancer was a teacher of life, it invited me to really experience my aliveness. And what does that really mean? What does it mean to be alive? What feels good to you? And so for me, it's the ability to wake up in the morning and feel good. Not necessarily have pain or ailments that are limiting me, to have energy to do all that's important with me, to live a life that's in deep meaning and purpose. And when I think about that, things that are meaningful are things that kind of, make my wheels spin. And then purpose is once you establish that, you're wanting to share that with others. That's really the purpose in life. And then at the end of all this, it's being able to do all of those things that I mentioned, but to then go after like those, what I would say is, more or less awe-inspired experiences. Those experiences, and it could be even little things, but just things that tickle you. And that for me, I think is what cancer brought to me, is just within the ordinary, everything's extraordinary. It's just amplified. And I get goosebumps. Like I have goosebumps saying this. And it's just because everything is just so sweet and precious, because this probably shouldn't be here for me today, but it is because of medicine, because of the research that you do in this lab. So thank you. And so I think it's just really a gift that you invited me to be here to share that message, but it's to each our own. And it took me time to get here, right? It didn't just happen. It happened over 25 years, but now I can sit here with the confidence that I made it through, and
you're paying it forward to other people.
Yeah.
With what you do, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, it's really lovely.
What would you say about the mindsets and the hopelessness and despair, and the way for the listener to frame this conversation?
All I would tell you is this, based on what I've seen and the work that I do, I would not be afraid to get a cancer diagnosis today, because I know that there are paths forward that could help me get through that experience. And I don't know how to say it more powerfully than that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for both of you being here today. This was like such a joy, and just to get to learn from you a little bit and hear about this. I'm excited for how it'll land with people. So
thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
It was great.